Jayam Vishnupad Paramahansa Paribrajakacharyasto Tarasata Shishimad A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnavrinda Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Prem Sikoho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivas Arigor Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinatha Shai Kunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan Ki Jai. Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai. Mayapur Dham Ki Jai. Jagannath Puri Ki Jai. Jamuna Mai Ki Jai. Ganga Mai Ki Jai. Bhakti Devi Ki Jai. Tulsi Maharani Ki Jai. Samaveda Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Shri Shri Guru and Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Before discussing the glories of Srila Prabhupada in the Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita, this week, Satsvarup Das Goswami, he mailed to me from America a book that he had compiled. And he felt that it was very important that I read this book, so he sent it all the way from his home. It cost him $30 just to send it. So I was wondering, why should I, now we're in the middle of Prabhupada Lilamrita, why is Maharaj sending me this book? This book is all of the slokas that Maharaj researched and found after Srila Prabhupada left this world, how a disciple should reconciliate within himself the disappearance of his spiritual master. And it's one sloka after another, Srimad Bhagavatam, beginning with 1:621, going on to Chaitanya Charitamrita, Madhya Lila 8:248, Srimad Bhagavatam 3:25-20, Srimad Bhagavatam 4:28-46, 4:28-50. All of these slokas and the purports that Prabhupada wrote, they prepare the disciple for how they can understand the disappearance of their spiritual master and how they can continue in their spiritual life rather than associating through Vapu, now associating through Vani. So today marks a great catastrophe in the world. We've lost a pure devotee, His Holiness Gopal Krishna Das Goswami. We're all in mourning. Srila Prabhupada, he distinctly describes from the 4th canto, after Puranjana, because he was thinking of his wife at the time of death, became a woman. She then married a great Vaishnava, and she served her Vaishnava husband until he left the world. And then she lamented. And Prabhupada describes at that place that the disciple should cry when the spiritual master leaves this world. And at the same time, he should understand that actually he's never separated from his spiritual master. Because the Vapu might not be there, the Vapu, Prabhupada again and again says that sometimes Vapu can be appreciated, but Vani is always with the disciple. And if a disciple continues to follow the instructions of his spiritual master and absorb himself in the Vani of the spiritual master, he's never separated from his spiritual master. So I'm going to put this book in the library, Prabhupada's library. If anyone needs comfort and understanding how to deal with the separation from their spiritual master after he leaves, they can study this book. I also want to spend just a few minutes glorifying His Holiness Gopal Krishna Goswami, because almost, I think every single person in this room is second generation. I don't see any Prabhupada disciples here at all. Possibly some Prabhupada disciples might be listening on YouTube. But Gopal Krishna Maharaj was such an exemplary disciple of Srila Prabhupada. Actually, I believe he was the first Indian-born disciple of Srila Prabhupada that Prabhupada initiated in the Western countries. Because Maharaj, as a student, he first studied at Sorbonne in France, and then from there he went to Montreal, all on scholarship at the McGill University. He got his master's degree there, and in 1968, he began associating with Srila Prabhupada and took initiation from him. Now, I only became a disciple of Prabhupada in 1970, but even from 1970, I had heard about Gopal Krishna Maharaj. He was the only devotee amongst all of Prabhupada's disciples that we knew who were earning and they were supporting Srila Prabhupada's temples, and at the same time balancing living and working in the material world and maintaining first-class devotional service in all of his devotional activities. So I first got to see Gopal Krishna Maharaj. He was such a striking figure. When Prabhupada left America in 1970 to make the World Sankirtan Party here in India, he didn't come back to America for a full year. And when he returned, he came to New York, and all of the devotees from the East Coast, because America's very big, East Coast and then West Coast, all the devotees came to New York to see Srila Prabhupada. And for 1 year, the devotees who had been waiting to be initiated met Prabhupada at that time. So I had also gone for my second initiation then. It was July 1971. And Prabhupada was going to be performing the first initiation ceremony. And I was sitting in the temple room, Radha Govindaji's temple room, chanting, waiting for the initiation ceremony to begin. And there were not many devotees there in the temple. And I noticed one devotee. He was Indian. And just as in this room, all around the room, there were pictures, paintings, the original paintings, because the press was there. And at every single painting, this devotee offered his full dandavats and very loudly offered his pranam mantras to Srila Prabhupada so that we could hear his pranam mantras. And if while he was offering his dandavats and offering his pranam mantras, one syllable was incorrect, he would start all over again and continue again. So I was watching him going around the room, and I've never seen a devotee like this who's so attentive to his mantras, to his devotion, that he sees in the pictures, all the deities are right there offering his obeisances. And I was so impressed by this devotee. And then I went up to the women's ashram, and there was one young woman there. And of course the men can't come into the women's ashram, but someone was knocking on the door. And we said, who is it? He said, my wife is there, can you please call her? And it was that same devotee. And his wife wouldn't come out of the women's ashram. She said, I need some saris. You have to buy some saris for me. I don't have anything to wear. You have to go buy me some saris. I was thinking, this poor, wonderful, pure devotee, he has such a wife who's misusing him like this. And I had a terrible impression that this person who I saw in the temple, so pure, and he has a wife who was just misusing him for getting saris and things like that. And it left a deep impression on me. And then I went to serve in New York doing book distribution. And I would go out 6:30 in the morning, come back 8:30 at night. And none of the other devotees, they would come and go during the day. So I noticed in the evening time, we would distribute books at this huge bus terminal. There were 4 different levels, 4 different floors. And in the basement floor is where all the buses would go out. So that all the people would be standing in line to go into the buses. So we would go down there in the evenings, and we would distribute books while the people were standing in line. And I noticed that, oh, there's that same devotee. He had suit and tie on. He was coming from his job. And he would come down into the basement of the bus terminal in New York City after work and distribute books to the people at the bus terminal. And I thought, oh, I just can't, this person is just, I've never met anyone like him. I've never seen anyone like him. And then there were great turmoils in the New York temple because the GBC and his wife were not following the principles. So I had to escape from my life. I came here to India, and when I came here to India, after a few months, I was sent with a message. I had to take a very important package, letters, documents from Vrindavan to Mayapur and give them to Srila Prabhupada. It was about land that Prabhupada wanted to purchase here. So I go into Prabhupada's room to give him the package, and I never told anyone about the problems that were going on in New York City at the temple. I just had to escape because it was a very dangerous situation. So as I'm sitting there with Srila Prabhupada, again in comes this same devotee, Gopal Krishna Das. And he says to Prabhupada, this devotee can tell you talking about me, she can tell you everything that was going on in New York. And I would like her to write a letter to you explaining everything that was going on. And I was so surprised. You don't want to discuss problems with Srila Prabhupada. But then afterwards I found out that Prabhupada went, because Gopal Krishna Maharaj had come to India, he had also left New York for the same reason I left. He had come to India to explain to Prabhupada, and Prabhupada at that time, he made Gopal Krishna the GBC for the entire country of India. He was our GBC then. 1 GBC for the whole, now I don't know how many GBCs we have here in India, but Prabhupada trusted him so much that he was our GBC for all of India then. So then from that time onwards, from 1974, 1975 onwards, I've been serving under Gopal Krishna Maharaj in full trust, understanding that his goal, because I would, in Prabhupada's house, I would watch Prabhupada speaking one-on-one with Gopal Krishna Maharaj in his room, giving him so many instructions, and I saw how close he was to Srila Prabhupada and how Srila Prabhupada trusted him. He made him the trustee of his BBT. He made him the GBC of India. He gave him so many instructions how to preach here in India. And not only in India, he was preaching all over the world. So my whole Krishna consciousness, I've had the deepest respect for Gopal Krishna Maharaj. When he started to have his heart problems, he decided to come here for a little while, and he had me be his secretary. I had to do all of his correspondence then because there were no other secretaries here. And I'm feeling such distress, separation, bereavement, because for whatever reason, although he left his house in perfect order, Srila Prabhupada has taken him from us to take him to where the next mission is. I say he's left the house in perfect order because here in Vrindavan, after so many years of opposition and resolutions and dissolutions and depressions and compressions, Gopal Krishna Maharaj successfully was able to have his very, very strong and senior disciples come here and take over so many of the management positions and the departments after training them so well in other temples. And now our Vrindavan temple is very stable because he has so many of his disciples here. We have our two of our temple presidents are his disciples, and we have all over the temple. Our Gurukul is being run by his disciples. Our Echo Farm is being run by his disciple. Anywhere you look, his well-trained disciples now have been able to stabilize our Vrindavan temple. And of course, we all know the miraculous service that Maharaj has done in Delhi, establishing so many temples as Prabhupada instructed him. Same time overseeing the BBT, which was the life force of Srila Prabhupada. Same time traveling and preaching. I don't know if you're aware of this, but it was Gopal Krishna Maharaj who Prabhupada first sent to Russia. He was the first preacher in Russia. And that was also one of his assignments by Srila Prabhupada. Also Canada, he was the GBC for all of Canada. You can just go on and on and on, all of the amazing services that Gopal Krishna Maharaj has done for Srila Prabhupada. And I'm sure that Prabhupada, although he was doing so much here, Prabhupada probably needs him where he is right now. And we are bereaving, feeling great separation from him, and hoping that we can continue in the eternal service of Srila Prabhupada, again in his association in our next life. So now we'll go on with the Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita. We're at a very interesting point here. We're beginning because now we have Prabhupada's 1966 diary. And Prabhupada didn't miss a single day. There was so much going on. Prabhupada was so active. He was active in his classes, his kirtans, his preaching. He was active in his correspondence. He was active in his book distribution. And he was really, with great momentum, making steps to establish Krishna consciousness now all over the world. We're up to January 22nd. And I will read interspersingly between the two books because Satsvarup Maharaj did not have this diary, so he only knew some days of what was going on. For instance, he has January 22nd, and then he has January 30th. But we will go through each day in that week, every single week, and then he goes to February 4th, February 15th, and so we won't miss a single day of Prabhupada's entries. So on January 22nd, Satsvarup Maharaj writes, while Srila Prabhupada prayed to receive Radha and Krishna in New York, a snowstorm hit the city. That morning, Srila Prabhupada, who had perhaps never before seen snow, woke and thought that someone had whitewashed the side of the building next door. Not until he went outside did he discover that it was snow. The temperature was 10 degrees. That was 10 degrees Fahrenheit, which is minus 12 degrees Celsius, way below freezing. The city went into a state of emergency. Emergency because you see here this snow, and we can go on to the next one. You can't move in the snow. The buses, the trains, the subways, the cars, there was no transportation whatsoever. So the people were locked in the city, and all the millions and millions of commuters that came every day to work, they couldn't even enter the city. The city went into a state of emergency, but Prabhupada continued his daily walks, because in order for Prabhupada to eat, he had to walk 7 or 8 blocks to Dr. Mishra's apartment. Now he had to walk through heavy snow, only a thin dhoti beneath his overcoat, his head covered with his Swami hat. The main roads were cleared, but many sidewalks were covered with snow. We have one picture here like that. Where is it? Oh, where is it? Here. This is the way the sidewalks were, because there's a law in America when it snows, whatever house you're living in, you're obligated by law to shovel away the snow so that people can walk on the sidewalk. But see these big mounds here? These are cars that are completely covered by the snow. So there would be a walkway, but other than that, you couldn't move in either direction. And this is how Prabhupada had to walk through the snow. The main roads were cleared, but many sidewalks were covered with snow. Along the strip of park dividing Broadway, we had heard, see Broadway, it's a very old main artery in New York City. New York City is in a grid going the avenues going up and down and the streets going across, but Broadway goes diagonally across. And Broadway was so broad that just like we have these green strips here in India, there was a green strip with benches where people could sit. So it says here, the main strip of park dividing Broadway, the gusting winds piled snowbanks to shoulder height and buried the benches. The Broadway kiosks, that's the little shops, plastered with layers of posters and notices, were now plastered with additional layers of snow and ice. But despite the weather, New Yorkers still walked their dogs. Here you go. The pets now wearing raincoats and mackinaws, which are these jackets. You see, it's such a fashion because just like we were hearing on Sunday, on Ekadasi, which was yesterday, right, Saturday, Prabhupada was speaking about love. And he said that when you drop a rock into water, it makes waves. And those waves continue until it hits the shore. And he explained that when the rock first falls, just like a little baby when it's first born, everything goes into the mouth, the anamoya stage. They're just thinking of themselves. And then as they grow, maybe they'll give some food to their brother, or maybe to their mother and father. They start noticing other people, and their love grows like that. So for people who are alienated, as in the Western countries, the families are all broken up. They don't know, some of them never saw their fathers, their mothers, their brothers, sisters. Everything is alienated in many families. So since they don't have people to love, they go to the pet store and they buy an animal. And they make that animal just like their child. And they love that animal. And they have hotels for the dogs. They have dog walkers. These are all dog walkers because the people have to go to work. So a dog walker takes their dogs. They have daycare for the dogs. They have special diets for the dogs and doctors for the dogs and psychiatrists for the dogs and different colored fashions for the dogs to match what the owner is wearing. So this is life in America. So it says here, Satsuru Maharaj says here, such pampering by American dog owners left Prabhupada with a feeling of surprised amusement, because we know how dogs are treated in India. Here, everyone has their own society. The dogs, they have their society, the humans have their, there's very little mixing. As he approached West End Avenue, he found the doormen blowing whistles to signal taxis as usual, but also scattering salt to melt the ice and create safe sidewalks in front of the buildings. So if you ever get stuck in a snowstorm, just like when we boil water, we put salt in because the salt increases the temperature, the boiling temperature, makes the water hotter. So if you're stuck in snow, you take salt and you sprinkle the salt, and that helps to melt the snow so you can walk. Very dangerous, actually, snow. In Riverside Park, the benches, pathways, and trees were glazed with ice and gave off a shimmering reflection from the sky. In the news, Selective Service officials announced the first now we have a new subject, because we were hearing about all of the protests, the war protests in Vietnam, and now in the news, Selective Service, these are the Army, the ones who select which young men are going to be drafted and forced to go into the Army. Those officials announced the first substantial increase in the draft. Draft is when the men are forced to go into the Army. They get drafted in. Since the Korean War, a month-long peace ended with the U.S. Air Force bombing North Vietnam. The New York transit strike ended after 3 weeks. So there was the workers of the New York Transit, means all of the public transportation, trains, subways, buses. So they were on strike. And it ended after 3 weeks because the transit labor leader died in jail of a heart attack. So America, specifically New York, was not doing very well at this time. So now we will go on, because these are the points that were not mentioned in the Prabhupada Lilamrita. This is Srila Prabhupada's handwriting in this book. You see every day. Some of his letters are also there. And because Prabhupada was writing quickly, so then they very nicely type on the side what Prabhupada had written. So this is the 19th of January, just going backwards a little bit so we understand what's going on in Prabhupada's life right now. By the grace of Sri Sri Guru and Gauranga, an encouraging letter is received today from Sri Padampat Singhania of Kanpur, India, Temple Hopeful. So we read that letter last week, how there were 2 major points that Mr. Singhania raised with Prabhupada. He very much appreciated the idea that there should be a Hindu temple, a Radha Krishna temple in New York. But number 1, the Reserve Bank of India does not allow money out of India. And number 2, he would not allow a temple to be made in a rented or purchased building. He would send his own men and build the temple himself, even if it cost millions of dollars. And then we saw also the picture of the temple that he built in Kanpur, because he wanted everything to be done first class. To see the publication sale office, U.S. Government Office of Education, 110 Livingston Street. This is for Prabhupada's reference, phone number. He also saw Mr. L. Malhotra. Mr. Malhotra was an official in the Indian consulate who helped him to get that, Rabindranath Tagore, when Prabhupada gave the lecture on God consciousness. So again, he went to see him at the New India House, submitted Chandrasekhar's case for transfer of his office in New York. He said to consider. So Chandrasekhar was one of Prabhupada's supporters in New Delhi. He was helping him with official work. Prabhupada's passport was going to expire soon. So Chandrasekhar from the Indian side was trying to get it expedited so that Prabhupada's passport could be extended for another year, and then he could get a year visa extension as well. 2 sets of books taken back from Paragon Book Gallery. As we saw last week, Paragon Book Gallery specialized in books on Eastern religion and culture. Srila Prabhupada stored his books there. So originally, Gopal Agarwal sent 25 sets of books. And now Prabhupada was going to have another 35 sets of books sent, because Paragon was selling, and Prabhupada individually was also selling and putting his books in many bookshops all over New York City. This makes altogether 7 sets taken back, because Prabhupada would store his books there and take them as he was selling them, balanced with them 18 sets. Now, January 20th, Ban Maharaj's letter replied. We read Ban Maharaj's letter last week, how he did the homework for Prabhupada. He looked up how much it was going to cost for 14-inch Radha Krishna deities, the shipping, the packing, and the clothing. It would be 1,400 rupees for the deities and 350 rupees for the clothing. So Prabhupada replied that letter. He is requested to see Dr. Radhakrishnan. We saw who Dr. Radhakrishnan is, for sanction of exchange. Now everything depends on the supreme will of the Lord Sri Krishna. Sri Padampat Singani replied, Chandrasekhar replied, and asked to send 1 set Bhagavatam to Sir Padampat Singania, because Prabhupada's remaining 900 sets of Srimad Bhagavatam were still in India. So Prabhupada was able to get Chandrasekhar, his assistant, to send 1 set to Mr. Singania. Ban Maharaj was one of Srila Prabhupada's godbrothers and the rector of Institute of Oriental Philosophy across the street here. Now, we don't usually hear the word rector when it comes to colleges. Usually you hear the word chancellor, vice chancellor, or dean. But a rector is a special title, and that is, it's a priest who is overlooking either a church or a temple or an institute of education. So also when we opened our Gurukula for the first time in 1976 here, Prabhupada made a rector, and that was Yashodanandan Swami, because he was both a sannyasi and he was looking after the school at the same time. So Dr. Radhakrishnan was the president of India, and Srila Prabhupada had met him previously. So now, since the heart attack of Lal Bahadur Shastri, there was about a 2-week interim where they had an acting president, and then they had an election. This is 1966. And in that election, Indira Gandhi was elected from the All India Congress Party to be the next prime minister. And she held on to that post very tenaciously for many years as the daughter of Nehru and the adopted daughter of Mahatma Gandhi to lead the party. And Prabhupada also approached her for assistance, but it wasn't successful. So this is the letter that Sri Padampat Singania wrote to Srila Prabhupada. We read it last week because it was in the Satsvarupa Maharaj put the whole letter into the Prabhupada Lilamrita. So you can understand just Sri Padampat Singania, he was a devotee of the Lord, but in the mood of Dwarkadish. And he had 4 sons. He named his sons Gopal Krishna, Gaurhari, Govinda Hari, and Shama Hari. So really he was a devotee. And he very much supported what Prabhupada was doing, but because of the Reserve Bank limitations and a difference in mentality, Prabhupada explained that we are Brijbasis, we worship Radha and Krishna in a very simple fashion with much bhakti, and you are Dwarkavasis, so we have to have some compromise between the two. But unfortunately, Mr. Singania was not willing to make that compromise. That's all right, because as one door closes, another door opens. And we'll find out that in this way, Prabhupada was able to establish support here in the place where he was actually opening the temples. And that's what was needed. How long can you import? How long can you import money? How long can you import devotees? when you plant a tree, it has to have the nourishment right there where it's been planted. If you transplant a tree, it has difficulty adjusting. So Prabhupada, planting this seed, that's what this is called, this volume 2, here. On this new cover, it doesn't have it. But originally, planting the seed. So Prabhupada was planting this seed of Lord Chaitanya's Sankirtan tree. And in order for this seed to fructify, he had to have the nourishment, he had to have the gardeners, he had to have the distributors of the fruit, everything here where the tree was being planted. So now we're on January 21st. You see how meticulous Srila Prabhupada was. Postage 25 cents, sugar, etc., 90 cents, total $1.15. Have any of us ever done accounts like this in our life? Maybe Narendra Krishna has, because he knows how to do these things. But we just spend carelessly. We never look at the paisa but Prabhupada, every single penny. He used to say that the money in ISKCON, that is his bloodstream. And if we waste even a drop of a single paisa or penny, that's like a drop of his blood, losing his blood. So he was very careful. He trained his devotees how to do accounting. He trained Gargamuni, Prabhu, how to be our first treasurer. And in that way, this bloodstream was being used to actually keep the body going of ISKCON. Letter received from C.C. Doctor of Bombay. I tried to search everywhere. I don't know who C.C. Doctor is. Possibly this mysterious person will come up. But the bad news is he's gone back on his promise. So whatever it was, again, Prabhupada has lost another supporter from India. This is not good. Better late than never. So Prabhupada was probably depending on him for some type of support. And now at this late stage, he's informing Prabhupada that he won't be helping him. Mr. Bogart asked me to see him on Monday morning in his office, 866 United Nations Plaza. Now, Mr. Bogart is mentioned throughout 1966. When we read here in the Lilamrita, because his office was at the United Nations Plaza, for all these years I was led to believe that he was an officer within the United Nations. But that's not true. Because you see in this map here, there's the United Nations, and this red circle, it's an office complex called the United Nations Plaza because it's so close to the United Nations. And Mr. Bogart was actually, he was involved in politics in the beginning, but he was a protester of nuclear, just like we have all these nuclear plants. For instance, in Chernobyl, the nuclear plant exploded and everything became radioactive and so many people died. In Japan, Fukushima, so the same thing happened. There was a tidal wave and everything becomes radioactive and impossible, uninhabitable because of the radioactivity. So Mr. Bogart, he was involved in protesting that America was setting up nuclear energy units all over the country because he just saw these as time bombs that were going to eventually explode and everything would become radioactive. Somehow or other, Srila Prabhupada came in contact with Mr. Bogart because Mr. Bogart had influence or he had connections with different foundations and charities in America. And Mr. Bogart was giving Prabhupada advice who to contact. We will read later a very sad story that Mr. Bogart, he was not quite as old as Prabhupada, he was still an elderly gentleman. And when Prabhupada made his 26 Second Avenue, he invited Mr. Bogart to come, and Prabhupada was making a big feast for him. And he told one of the devotees, his name was Stradish Das, he said, "I'm busy cooking, don't let anyone come up and disturb me." Meanwhile, Mr. Bogart came, and this foolish boy would not allow Mr. Bogart to go see Srila Prabhupada. And Mr. Bogart sat for 1 hour and finally in frustration left. And Prabhupada couldn't understand why Mr. Bogart wasn't coming. And when he came downstairs and found out that Stanley was his karmi name, Stradish, wouldn't allow him to go upstairs, Prabhupada called him fool, rascal, nonsense. And soon after that, Stradish left the association of the devotees, and Prabhupada was very upset by that. But what Prabhupada explained is, I think we have here, yes, we don't have any pictures of Mr. Bogart. He was not connected to the United Nations. His office was at the United Nations Plaza. He was a political activist protesting nuclear energy units. He assisted Prabhupada in printing. He printed the first letterhead for ISKCON, and Prabhupada had gotten some trustees, and he put all the names of the trustees, and Larry Bogart put his name on top of all the trustees. And Prabhupada explained later to the devotees that actually there's a clique. A clique means there's like a gang of very influential people. And they go to these foundations, and for charity purposes, they get huge amounts of money for poor people, for feeding, for different reasons, medical, and they don't actually give it for the purpose that they're getting it, but this group, this gang or this clique, they keep the money. So after Prabhupada discovered that this was actually what was going on, one of the devotees explained to Prabhupada that in the Red Cross, which is, everyone respects the Red Cross, they do medical emergency service during times of war and they don't care about which side is which, they just try to help people medically. So he explained to Prabhupada that all the money that the Red Cross collects, 75% of it goes towards advertisement, and only 25% goes towards actually the medical funding. So when Prabhupada understood, after going to many of these foundations, which all refused Prabhupada help, he gave Mr. Bogart a new name. He called him Mr. Bogus. So Prabhupada, in any way possible, he was trying to get help. People, whatever little help he could get from the people, he was going a step forward. But this was the type of help he was getting at this point. So now we've caught up. This is January 22nd that we just read about. Prabhupada spent 15 cents on salt, 22 cents on bananas, total 37 cents. Now, Prabhupada has written a letter to Mr. Surya Kumar Joshi. Because in India at that time, practically it was a one-party nation, the Congress Committee, All India Congress Committee, the Indian National Congress. It was only when finally the Congress split up and the Janta Party was made, and then Morarji Desai was able to become the Prime Minister, and so many unhealthy politics went on. But at this time, it was all Congress in India. They had full control of the country, and Mr. Surya Kumar Joshi, he was a member at Jantar Mantar, 7 Jantar Mantar of the Congress Committee. So Prabhupada wrote to him. And Mr. Joshi, we will read his reply after Prabhupada wrote to him. He was so supportive of Srila Prabhupada. He was thinking of Prabhupada the night before when he received this letter that Prabhupada wrote to him. He said, not only should you try to get support from India, but more important is you contact the Indians who are now residing in America, Canada, and the West Indies, and you get their support. Because although the Indian government would not allow any money to come out of India, they gave Prabhupada permission to approach the Indians who were already out of India and get donations from them. It didn't happen. Now it's happened. Now many of our ISKCON temples are being supported by the diaspora of India, the Indian communities who have now settled outside of India, and they have adopted ISKCON as their temples and are supporting, and they're in our management committees and things like that. So it took some years, 20, 40 years, but eventually this is how our temples are being supported, primarily by the Indian community that we're living now outside of India. So this is the beginning. When Prabhupada, he's approaching the politicians now in India trying to get support, and Surya Kumar Joshi gave him that key to also look for support from the Indians who are living outside of India. Also sent a letter to Beni Bhushan Datta if he can help in this matter. So another person who is lost in history, I just know that he was connected between Bangladesh and Bengal. He was one of Prabhupada's supporters, but I don't know what that letter was about. We couldn't find it. The cleaner sent by Nina came to doctor's apartment and cleaned it. I gave him some cold drink and he was glad. So still now every day Prabhupada has to walk from his little studio to Dr. Mishra's for cooking. So apparently some cleaner came and Prabhupada was able to give him a drink. All right, again, state of emergency in New York City. Today, due to snowfall the whole day, I did not go either to Dr. Mishra's apartment nor outside the studio. I managed my things here in the studio. No expenditure today. So Prabhupada was practically locked into his studio room. He had to manage how to eat that day. He couldn't go out. The snow was so severe. Now the 24th. To see Mr. Larry Bogart morning 9 a.m. Saw Mr. Larry Bogart in his office. He advised me to write to Mr. Felix Morrow for an appointment to see. So I'm writing him and sending some literature of Srimad Bhagavatam. Bus fare, 30 cents. Okay, so now enters Mr. Felix Morrow. In America, they were very suspicious, and there was a phobia against communism because the Cold War was going on. The Americans were the capitalists, and the communists were taking over country after country after country after the Second World War. And America was trying to stop the incursions of the communists. That's why they were in the Vietnam War, because the communists wanted to take over the country. Cuba, many different places, North Korea and South Korea. All of these wars, small wars were going on between America and the communist blocs. One is called the Iron Curtain, the other is called the Bamboo Curtain, Russia and China. The communists were trying to take over. So anyone who was donned a communist in America was considered a national enemy. If you had it anywhere on your name that you were involved in the communists, you were immediately being checked by FBI, and you were considered to be a subversive element in the community, in the nation. So Mr. Bogart advised Prabhupada to contact Mr. Felix Morrow, who was a communist in America. But fortunately, he gave up his communism, at least externally, although subversively, he was still acting like that. And he started a publishing house called the Universal Publishing House. So he was an American communist political activist and newspaper editor. In later years, Morrow left the world of politics to become a book publisher. In the late 1950s, Morrow founded University Books, publishing hundreds of titles. It was for this purpose that Mr. Bogart recommended Srila Prabhupada to contact Mr. Morrow, and Mr. Morrow unfortunately refused to help Prabhupada. So Prabhupada was going, you can say, one step forward, two steps backwards. He was trying his best, any avenue he could that he was given, he was trying, but still not having much success. He was still living under the wing of Dr. Mishra. He didn't have the freedom to preach the way he wanted to. Dr. Mishra was using him for kirtan only, but Prabhupada wasn't allowed to lecture. He was having his own little meetings in his little room, and therefore Prabhupada felt that the best thing he could do is he could start recording his classes and his bhajans. And many of the vintage bhajans that we have is from the room where Prabhupada, when he finally bought this tape recorder, he started taping his bhajans, the Chintamani prayers, the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. When Prabhupada's singing alone, it's from this time. And he did a 3-hour taping, recording of the Gita Upanishad introduction at that time that was later typed by one of the visitors, one of the students, Mrs. LeBlanc. Prabhupada had asked her to do the editing for his Bhagavad-Gita, but after reading it for some time, when she understood that Prabhupada was a personalist and not a monist, she refused to do the editing because she was a student of Dr. Mishra. But she did do the typing for Prabhupada's introduction of Bhagavad-Gita that we still have in the Bhagavad-Gita to this day. So Prabhupada decided, Mrs. Sally Agarwal, remember Prabhupada had written a long letter to Sally trying to convince her to open a restaurant, an Indian restaurant in New York City so she could become fabulously wealthy. She never received that letter. That's the type of disappointment Prabhupada was. Because interim, they moved to Ohio. So that letter that was sent to Butler, Pennsylvania, never reached them. So, received letter from Mrs. Sally Agarwal, this is her new address in Dover, Ohio, intimating that she is taking my books to her new residence. It appears that she has not received my letter. Decided to purchase one tape recorder. The brand name was Martel, from the advertisement Times of New York. So, because here we have Times of India, so the New York Times Prabhupada used to call the Times of New York. One set of books taken by Mrs. Milapsky, these are all students from Dr. Mishra's that would come separately to hear Prabhupada's classes and kirtans. She promises to pay on Thursday, which she did. Lectures delivered in the studio on the test of spiritual realization. It means no more any artificial demand for the body and mind. The people appreciate it, no expenditure today. So these lectures are still available. You can hear them. The 1966 lectures in Prabhupada's archives. You'll see in those days, the tape recorders were about this big. They were the size of a suitcase. Yeah. Okay, now, Wednesday 26th. Look at this magnificent church. This is a Unitarian Universalist church where they invite people from all different beliefs to share their beliefs. And this is their community of faith and belief. So Prabhupada was invited to speak every Wednesday at this church, this magnificent church. So this is the first meeting at the church at 4 West 76th Street. And then Prabhupada, of course, he was doing all of his letter writing, another letter to Sally, the Bureau of Libraries in Brooklyn, the Asia Society regarding books, He went to see the tape recorder, but it wasn't in good condition. Later, one of the students donated a tape recorder to Prabhupada. Butter 44 cents, bus fare 30. The bus fare was going 15 cents, coming back 15 cents, so 30 cents. Center Park West, this is the address of the beautiful church where he was invited to speak. So just their little mission statement so we understand how Prabhupada was actually, he was welcomed by people who were open-minded in their beliefs. Our mission is to build an inclusive, welcoming community that connects us to our spiritual centers and to one another, works to end systems of racism and other oppressions, and is grounded in reason, service, and love. We are a congregation that believes in love, liberation, and hope. Of course, nowadays, this love, liberation, and hope means that they'll approve LGB plus, and whatever it is. They've kind of, going, liberation means you can do whatever you want nowadays. But in these days, there was still some religiosity involved. And they welcomed Hindus, Buddhists, they even welcomed atheists to speak, just to understand within a community how people can have different ideas. We are united by our shared humanity and commitment to building a better world. We come for spiritual deepening and meaning-making, for hope and centering, for community and friendship, to raise our children and to learn from them. We are activists and artists, families and singles, seekers and believers, local New Yorkers and global citizens joining from afar. Each of us is free to follow our own spiritual path. This is okay. The real American way, everything, anything. Freedom of religion means you can create your own religion. Each of us is free to follow our own spiritual path, but finds value in doing so together, bounded always by justice and love. So Prabhupada's lectures were probably very much welcome because they gave him every week an opportunity to lecture there. So now it's after 7 o'clock. We've caught up now with the Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita. Actually, we have 3 more days to catch up because the next entry that Satsvarupa Maharaj gives is January 30th, and in the diary we're only up to January 27th, so we'll continue here next week. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna. Jai.